Shout out to SneakyPig200 for supporting me on level 3 of Patreon. Hey everyone, I'm Albert Boris. Wave 4 of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass has finally been released now, after roughly 3 months of waiting. It's been probably one of the waves I've been the most excited to try out in the entire Booster Course Pass, even before last week's trailer. And there are a multitude of reasons as to why, like each wave having gotten better and better as time went on, the fact that it would be our first dip into the GameCube courses, the addition of the best Mario character, or the fact that all of the upcoming city courses would be much more ambitious and aesthetically interesting compared to what we had for waves 1 to 3. Of course, nothing will beat the hype for wave 2, when we went almost 5 months without an update. But this got close. So how did it end up? It's okay. Admittedly, wave 4 isn't as great as it could have been in my opinion. On the whole, I'm very pleased. But I would be lying if I said there was quite a lot of missed potential with a few of these tracks. On one hand, it's a bit understandable since wave 4 started a new row of cups, which meant a slight step back in complexity. But I still felt like quite a lot of these courses could have been better and more interesting. On the whole though, I really enjoy this wave, every single track in fact, even if the third one is still my personal favorite. So I thought, let's rank every single track in wave 4 and see which one's the worst and which one's the best. I've done this type of video ever since wave 2 released, so it's only right that I continue the tradition. With all that being said, let's get started. So let's start this list off with a rather simple and easy course, GBA Riverside Park. Now I have to say that out of all the waves currently released so far in the Boost Course Pass, wave 4 is by far the most consistent one in terms of pure quality. It might not be the peak of the DLC, but my was it difficult to come up with a stable ranking for these courses because a lot of them were basically on the same level. In fact, Riverside Park is only barely the weakest track. And just like with my wave 2 and 3 rankings, despite this being the weakest, I think this is still a really solid track. The Game Boy Advance courses are always the most interesting ones to see remade, considering in their original forms, they were just flat courses, albeit with unrealized potential. So seeing Nintendo give them the treatment they deserve is always welcome. That said, the Booster Course Pass has a tendency to bring back the GB tracks that were never really that interesting to begin with, which has unfortunately resulted in none of them being too amazing. They're still good, but a bit on the safe side compared to something like Cheeseland or Ribbon Road. Riverside Park continues this trend. It was never that mind-blowing of a track in Super Circuit, which is mirrored in this remake. That said, it sure got a glow up. The standout is obviously the graphics. For the first time, the Booster Course Pass visuals feel reminiscent of the base game's hyper-realistic art style, and it's beautifully utilized here, with a cozy park setting and dazzling yellow sunset. It almost feels like you're on a safari. The atmosphere is stellar, but there's only so much you can do with it, when the track itself is pretty simple. The layout isn't bad, but in contrast to the rest of wave 4, it does play quite a bit more safely. That said, they did the best they could with it, since there are now 2 is walking around the track, which will throw items randomly, and the final section has been transformed into a cave you drive up before jumping through a waterfall. It's not enough to lift this track from last place, but it does make the track come alive and feel somewhat more interesting. Although let's be fair, the final jump through the waterfall should have been a glider section. Oh well, moving on! Arriving in 7th place, we have what could be considered my signature track, after I correctly predicted it to make a return in this wave, DS Mario Circuit. This is one of the best Mario circuits for sure, so much so that it's not even last on this list. Now, out of all the tracks in wave 4, I think we can all admit that Mario Circuit is the worst looking one, with its slightly more cartoony and muted art style compared to something like Riverside Park. That said, it's not bad at all. In fact, I'd say it's almost on par with wave 1's best looking track. And in any case, the gameplay is what's the most important, and it delivers. Compared to other Mario circuits in the franchise, this one is much more difficult, with much tighter turns, more dangerous hazards, etc. Even the setting is slightly more interesting. An exclusive to this remake is the fact that the section after the pipe has become a forest now. For lap 3, the gameplay even changes up slightly. The most amazing thing ever happens. A Wiggler goes for a walk. Okay, so I have to admit, even though I'm satisfied that I correctly predicted this track's return, I feel like they could have done a little more with it. Yeah, it is a circuit, and a really good one at that, but when we're at Wave 4, I feel like you should at the very least give your basic tracks more justification for being in the booster course pass at all. Like, maybe take this detour for Peach's Castle and drive backwards for the final lap. I mean, it's right there anyways. The wiggler walking around is cool enough, although it doesn't really add anything to the track, compared to something like the chain jumps going haywire on London Loop. But this is just what it could have been. As a track, it's still pretty great, because despite being a circuit, it does a lot to be more unique and interesting in contrast to its peers. But compared to the rest of Wave 4, it stands no chance without any big changes, so it will stay here. So, Singapore Speedway. I have a pretty certain feeling that my opinion on the most overrated city track is gonna end up becoming my most controversial pick on this ranking. Singapore Speedway is like a politician. At first, it looks great, but as soon as it gets chosen, you notice it was all just a facade. Okay, that's not entirely true, but yeah. I want to love this track, and there are aspects I really enjoy, but on the whole, it's the most wasted potential in all of Wave 4. Forget Mario Circuit's potential castle route. This could have been much better. The main problem I always had with this track is how much it tries to be in your face with the gliders and chaotic music and night lights, almost as if to hide a rather simple and lame track design. The Marina Bay Sands and Chinatown segments look cool, but they barely have anything actually going on, while also being simple. Some sections are really good though, and with a good route that balanced out the simple with the complex bits, they could have created one of the best city tracks ever. The first and third laps were good enough. Even if lap 1 is just the first variant, an overglorified loop, it's a decent way to get the player drawn into the track without being too overwhelming. Right after, lap 2 takes you through the Chinatown segment and oh, it's already over. Okay. Now, lap 3 is amazing, acting as a combination of Singapore Speedway 2 and 3. Quite possibly one of the best laps out of any city track, with the twisted conveyor belts, epic gliding section and the final visit to Chinatown, and I adore the big blue style transition to it, with a glider right before it and conveyor belts after. But it feels so undeserving when laps 1 and 2 together, which are already too short on their own, only take you through the two most uneventful sections respectively. And in lap 1's case, that would have been fine, but when grouped with lap 2, it just makes the entire track feel underwhelming until lap 3 suddenly overwhelms you. It just doesn't really feel like an organic adventure. In my opinion, what lap 2 should have been is Singapore Speedway 3's layout in reverse. That way, you'd still go through the Chinatown section, as preparation for lap 3, but you'd also get to drive on the boulevard with palm trees, a section which is actually quite a bit more interesting to play on with its focus on alternate routes. This would also give a new perspective to lap 3's gliding section since you're visiting the same area but now gliding above it instead of driving on it. On one hand, I can see the charm of lap 3 having its own separate lap gate, Big Blue style, but I could have lived without it if it came at the cost of a good overall route. On the whole, Wave 4 city tracks had a lot of unrealized potential in their routes, but Singapore Speedway definitely got the short end of the stick here. I don't dislike the course, not at all. It had all the ingredients for an amazing track, like a banger atmosphere, an absolutely epic final lap, a good introduction. It's just that it could have been so much more, and what we got instead was a rather anticlimactic and simplistic city track. Next up, we have DK's Snowboard Cross. No, I will not call it by its alternate name. You don't even touch the summit at any point in the race. There's more to it than that, but yeah. Definitely the most janky Wave 4 track, that's for sure. It goes without saying that Mario Kart Wii seems to be Nintendo's favorite child aside from Mario Kart Tour when it comes to the Booster Course Pass track selection. 4 tracks so far and they're all fan favorites. That said, this is probably the first Wii remake that's actually pretty faithful to the original track. Whether it's the art style, the gameplay, pretty much anything. The only notable difference is the fact that the glider is activated after you're shot out from the cannon. Everything else down to the core has been unaltered. They even kept the cool gap shortcuts. It was always a very good track in Mario Kart Wii. The premise of being sent off to a snowy mountain and then having to race your way down snowboard style, doing all sorts of tricks from ramps and half-pipes, always made for one of the more epic beginner tracks, which is only amplified by the fresh music. And it's still that in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Well, to an extent at least. There are flaws with the track, but it has less to do with the course itself and more with the way that this game controls. One of the things that made this track so charming in Mario Kart Wii was, besides the track itself, the game's physics. Tricking off anything always felt super epic when you shook the Wii controller like a maniac and watched your character get sent flying up in the air. In Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, however, the tricks feel a bit more mundane, which unfortunately makes this version slightly less fun. But hey, at least the half-pipes are janky, so much so that half the time I randomly end up out of bounds, like how did this happen on 150cc? With all that being said though, DK Snowboard Cross is still a really good track that barely missed the top half of my ranking. A great course, but slightly held back by the game's physics. GCN Waluigi Stadium is in my opinion the best of the retro tracks in Wave 4. Pretty fitting for the first GameCube course in the Booster Course Pass. It was always a really cool track in Mario Kart Double Dash and Wii with its crazy jumps and tricks. Mario Kart Wii especially knocked it out of the park when they added in the half-pipes. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's version is both better and worse. On one hand, they removed the dancing signs. Why? The final jump also doesn't have a boost panel anymore, and feels much less epic as a result. In addition to 8 Deluxe's tricks feeling more mundane, what we got in return though was honestly more than worth it. There are now more sections that are trickable, the visuals are absolutely stunning, and the straightaway with half pipes has been slightly altered, as 2 of the piranha plant pipes are now sticking out of the ground vertically rather than horizontally, which makes for some nice variety. What's even crazier though is at the end of the straightaway, because if you trick off of the half pipe at the right angle, you can land on a platform hovering above it with anti-gravity boosters and a dash panel ramp. This can actually be quite difficult at times. And there's also one at the very end which will activate your glider as you're soaring towards the finish line. It's a bit crazy how much they did for this one track, but that might also explain why we didn't see it in Wave 3, like data mines were originally pointing towards. On the whole, despite some of the shortcomings, I can't stress enough how much I like this remake. From now on, we're getting to the really good tracks of Wave 4. Alright, now this was not a track I had high expectations on. Amsterdam Drift was by far the track I was the least hyped for in the entirety of Wave 4. Mostly because I was never really a big fan of it in Mario Kart Tour to begin with, but prior to Wave 4 releasing, we had also only heard a small part of the music, and it was not very good in my opinion. It sounded a little too chaotic. But then I actually heard the entire song, and I was filled with euphoria. Amsterdam Drift represented a rebirth for the city tracks. Prior to Wave 4, the city tracks were pretty simple in design without any particularly ambitious sections or gimmicks. But Amsterdam surprises you by having you even drive outside of the metropolitan area, like a windmill field, a canal, or a tulip field. On their own, they were kind of boring in Mario Kart Tour, but together they make for one of the greatest first impressions ever. Now, just like with Singapore Speedway, the route they went for wasn't the best, although at least it's passable in this regard. It's really a Tokyo treatment but with extra steps. Lap 1 is Amsterdam Drift 1, Lap 2 is Amsterdam Drift 2 in reverse since it's normally driven in the opposite direction. And Lap 3 tries to be Amsterdam Drift 3, but since it's also driven in the opposite direction normally, they had to do some crazy stuff to make that possible. It does feel a bit weird to exclude the glider to just Lap 1, and since each lap is very different from the other, the entire journey feels slightly disconnected since you only visit each area once. But at least they're all very unique and creative, so that it doesn't feel underwhelming like in Singapore Speedway. Personally though, I think this is what the route should have been. Lap 1 stays the same, Lap 2 also until you get to the very end, where you turn left instead of right to the finish line and do Amsterdam Drift 3. Then Lap 3 becomes the first lap, but in reverse. That way it would all come full circle, while also making you visit at least one section twice. Plus, let's be fair, it feels wrong to not have a glider for the final lap. As it is now, I still really love this map though, and would proudly consider it to be one of the strongest city tracks in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe so far. However, there was actually one city track in Wave 4 that ended up being even better, Bangkok Rush. Unlike Amsterdam Drift and Singapore Speedway, Bangkok Rush was in my opinion always an amazing track, even back in Mario Kart Tour. Quite possibly even the greatest city course of them all, whether it was the dazzling orange sunsets, the absolutely magnificent layout including the Kopraya River, Railway Market, the Skytrain rails, the parking lot, quite possibly the most epic gliding section in all of Mario Kart, you name it. And that's not mentioning how even within these sections you've got all these different alternate pathways, it was insane. It's all made for one of the most original and aesthetically unique city tracks ever. And for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, they combined all three amazing variants into one absolutely epic journey. The route they picked for Bangkok was probably the least flawed of Wave 4 city tracks at least, although there are still some questionable decisions, like having the epic glider be on lap 2 instead of 3. I still think it's really good as it is, as each lap is long and unique and the progression feels somewhat organic, starting off simple while getting more ambitious over time. Here's how I do it though. Lap 1 stays the same. Lap 2 also stays the same until after the gliding section, where you'll turn left and do the second half of lap 1 again. That way it's somewhat similar while still being slightly more crazy. Then lap 3 continues on as normally with the parking garage and market, but instead of turning right after that, you continue on and do Bangkok Rush 1 in reverse, with a glider activating once you get to the river, Peach Garden style. I feel like that would have made the journey slightly more organic with a glider for both laps 2 and 3, but I won't really complain too much because as it is now, it's still one of the greatest Wave 4 city tracks, and quite possibly the best city track in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe so far. In the context of Wave 4, it's only beaten out by one single track. And my favorite course in Wave 4 of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass is none other than the brand new track, Yoshis Island. This course, oh my goodness, this is absolutely amazing! Like, how should I even start? I can't even find the words to describe just how amazing this track is. It was heavily rumored that we'd be getting a Yoshi-themed Nitro track for Wave 4, but nothing could have prepared me for the sheer amazingness that we were in for. Up until this point, the Nitro tracks in the DLC were known for being oversimplistic and boring gameplay-wise, so I thought this rumored Yoshi track would be nothing more than just a figure 8, like the Yoshi board from Mario Party 1, but what we got instead was a crossover track with the Yoshi's Island game series. Now Yoshi's Island is, in my opinion at least, probably one of the greatest Nintendo 2D platformers, from its charming art style to unique gameplay and everything. And somehow, this course manages to take almost all of its most iconic aspects and make for one of the greatest courses of all time. Pretty much everything is here, from stilt guys to huff and puffins, even down to the question mark clouds, which when hit will spawn a new pathway where a flower ring will be waiting at the end. Even the course design itself is spectacular. It takes like 6 different level themes from the game and somehow manages to combine them into one epic adventure while still making it feel organic. And all of this combined isn't even everything, since they even changed the little things. The coins are now Yoshi coins, the startup jingle is the same as when you start a level in Yoshi's Island, and completing a race plays this little tune. On one hand, it's the level completion theme from Yoshi's Island, which is already an amazing touch, but legends might even recognize it as the jingle that plays when you finish a world in Mario Forever, only one of the greatest Mario fan games of all time. Honestly, I've always said to myself that Ninja Hideaway will probably always be the peak of the Booster Course Pass, but I'm not so sure anymore because this track is putting up a heavy competition for sure. Only time will tell if this track ends up becoming the greatest of the entire DLC, but for now, it's definitely my favorite course of Wave 4. And so, that was my ranking of the courses of Wave 4 of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. But what is your ranking? Did you agree with me or not? If you like this video, then make sure to like, share and subscribe to my channel as I talk about everything Mario related. With all of that being said, I'm signing off. Until next time.